Thanks. Where are you at right now?
I'm in Rockaway Beach. Yeah, just got back
Cool.
to the shop. Yeah.
Um, just through our texting this last week or two, do you maintain work outside of building boards?
I do. I actually just started doing that again. Uh, like a few months ago. So, the first few years of Paul Surf, I was just mainly shaping. I hadn't started glassing yet, and I began well, I got like so heavy into the board building and obsessive about it, and I really wanted to try to figure it out and give it all of my attention. So at the time, I was working other side jobs, and then I was getting so many orders that I thought, all right, well, if I just quit all my other work and focus on the board building, maybe I can make ends meet. And so I stopped doing all the other work, which was like mainly installation kind of work in the city, for like high-end retail, window displays, and things like this. So anyways, I stopped doing that work and devoted all my attention to Paul Surf, and which was kind of a double-edged sword. I learned a lot and got to focus all of my attention on the board building, but it kind of like it really shifted the board building from like a fun, exciting like side project to more like factory work in a way. So anyways, yeah, just in the past few months, I decided that I wanted to not focus solely on the board building and have another revenue stream coming in so that it could like lighten the intensity of the business for me, right? So sorry, can you hear that dinging? I don't know how to turn that off.
No, I can't.
Okay, okay, sorry.
You're good.
I'm getting text messages.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, so that's been a really actually like an incredible shift for me. I didn't have that really in the plans, um, but yeah, it's been like a real blessing to just get a little bit of breathing room and be able to, yeah, because I'm not 100% dependent on Paul Surf to pay my bills. Now I can get a little bit of distance from it and see it more as like just this fun, creative outlet for me, which it was the thing that originally drew me to it in the first place, right? But then it became like this kind of like it eclipsed my whole life. Like I was living in my shop at one point and just like really intense, not so glamorous or fun. Um, yeah. So anyways,
It's
yeah.
it's I've asked that question actually a lot over the years, um, not only to board builders but photographers and stuff about when the thing you love, your passion project becomes your main source of income, does it, diminish the reason or the joy and the reason why you started doing it? So I'm not surprised to hear you talk about that. Um, it it isn't always the case for some people, but for you, I feel like Paul Surf to me looks more like an art project than it does anything else. I think some people are running their businesses, and not that it doesn't look like a business as well, but it's not just producing surfboards and selling them to people. It feels like there's context around it, there's culture around it, and there's more to it. So I could see that some of that might get lost if you were just under the microscope every single day.
Yeah, totally. And a big part of, I guess, what was the joy kill for me in the board. Well, yeah, let me start off with sort of the trajectory of Paul Surf. What originally got me hooked was trying to figure out how to build a really professional, high quality surfboard. I wanted to try to figure out how to build boards that looked as beautiful as the boards that I saw in shops. at places like Pilgrim or Saturdays in New York City. And because there isn't that like widespread culture of board building here in New York, like there is in other places of the world, like Southern California. I had to do a lot of the experimenting and trial and error, just totally on my own, just blindly guessing in my shop alone in the middle of the night. And that was like part of the fun, which is kind of like masochistic in a way, because it was also like crazy brutal, um and humbling and disheartening and yeah, just like all the really difficult shit too, as well as fun when you figure out a new trick. So anyways, yeah, I was like tons of interest and excitement about trying to figure it out. And it felt like a couple years ago when I feel like I'm not saying by any stretch that I'm like, have it all figured out, but I'd figured out how to do almost everything that I saw other people capable of doing, like almost perfect saturation, color, like all the little fine details and perfect finishes and polishes and all that. Once I had figured all of that out, it was like an instant plateau in my enthusiasm for board building. Because I didn't see that coming. I thought that it would just be this like forever trajectory of, I'm going to be building boards for the rest of my life and just producing as many as I can and as in love with it as the day I began. But yeah, I realized in that kind of, it was, yeah, just like this epiphany moment where I realized that so much of what I was pursuing was the figuring out of this
Yeah.
craft. And the moment that I had figured it out, it was like a real wake up call, like, whoa, hold on, what am I doing here? Like, I
Yeah.
I love surfing, I love building surfboards, but do I want to like my whole career and life to be just putting out numbers so that I can pay the bills? And the answer was like just such a hard no, like deep in myself. So then I had to do some reckoning with the direction that I had sort of blindly taken, because my intention was never really to start a surfboard company. It was just to build some surfboards, and then because there are many options in this part of the world, for local handmade surfboards. I Yeah, I just started taking on a lot of orders that I or it was taking me a really long to fulfill. So it became like it snowballed into a business that I had never even actively decided to tackle. But yeah, it's kind of.
Do you think that there's a way to do it full time and still feel fulfilled by it?
I don't know. I don't think. Well, full time. Yeah, I don't know if what is full
Well,
time.
let me rephrase then. Is there a way for all of your income to be dependent and all of your running of your life to be dependent upon the board building and selling of surfboards and still feel, creatively fulfilled and enthusiastic about it?
I don't think so. Maybe it's because I'm ADD or something, but I just have too many other interests,
Yeah.
and to have to funnel all of my attention onto just board building again, because I did that for about 7 years, would be asking a lot from myself now, having stepped outside of it even for the past few months and looking back at how like creatively suffocated I felt.
Yeah.
um and so my background's more in art, and I also used to play and record a lot of music and work in the design world. So yeah, I just have a lot that's going on in my head, and I feel like surfboards is just one aspect of what Paul Schmidt does. Paul Surf is just one iteration of something that I'm very passionate about. Um, but yeah, I don't really imagine myself trying to make it the business that maybe I had envisioned a few years ago.
Good. Yeah, I think that's healthy. Um, let's back up a little bit. We'll come back to board building, obviously, but are you from Virginia? Is it?
Yeah, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, originally.
Is that
Very
anywhere near the beach? And then secondly, how did you discover surfing?
No, it's not really near the beach. It's a couple hours from Virginia Beach, which is where I grew up. Like Virginia Beach and Outer Banks is where my family would go for vacation, just a couple weeks a year. And so that was sort of my experience was with the ocean. Actually, I didn't even really like the beach when I was a little kid. I didn't like being sticky and sandy. It's really funny, but I grew up like in the suburbs in Virginia, and so um, when when I was probably 10 years old, I got a boogie board, and I loved boogie boarding. Like, became obsessed with boogie boarding as a little kid, and uh, and then one of my friends got a surfboard in middle school, and I was like, "Whoa, that looks really cool!" And he had surf mags in his room, and I was like, "What is this? What is this world with beautiful women in bikinis and crystal cleared barrels?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this looks like the coolest thing I've ever seen." And so his family owned a house in Duck in North Carolina in the Outer Banks, and I started going down for summers and surfing with him when I was in college, and I was surfing in Virginia Beach. And so I didn't really get into the surfing thing until later in life when I was like 19, 20 years old. That's when I really dove in to the deep end with it and became obsessed.
And how'd you discover board building?
Uh, so my background was in construction and carpentry. So my father owned a construction company my whole life. He passed away when I was 19, but so I worked from him from a young age and was always on job sites. And there was just that mentality of doing things yourself instilled in me from a young age. And so yeah, like after he died, I went and started working for a master carpenter. The kind of construction that he was doing was like more government contract, like big, drywall and demolition and that kind of stuff. And then yeah, after he died, I went and worked with a master carpenter, and we were doing more cabinetry and fine woodworking. And at the time, I was also super intensely pursuing surfing and surf whatever that was for me, and so I got it in my head that I wanted to try to make a wooden surfboard because I was working with wood all day. And so I built my first wooden longboard when I was maybe 20 years old, and that was like that was just such a fun project for me, and it planted a seed. Even though I didn't build another board for maybe 4 or 5 years, it planted a seed of something that I felt like I really, not only that I could be good at, but something that I wanted to explore more. It just was such a fun thing to do.
How did you construct it? What type of wood? And then what style of construction? And how did you learn how to do it?
Oh man, this was a Swaylox
Oh, wow.
search. Yeah, I was like
Amazing.
searching the forums of Swaylox, and there were yeah, a couple threads where people were talking about different ways to build a wooden surfboard, and some of them seemed way too complicated for me. And so I ended up doing something which I honestly I don't think that I've ever heard or seen anybody else do, but I did like a lattice construction. So the top and bottom were solid, and the inside were crisscross, alternating, right? So half of the slats would be empty, right? So it was like lattice on the inside, so that was somewhat hollow. But this was a 10-foot longboard. I tend to bite off more than I can chew. It was a 10-foot longboard made of bass and cherry, and I had biscuit jointed all the all the pieces together. And after it was glassed, I think that the board weighed 80 pounds, maybe
Oh
more.
my
And so
gosh.
I had finished the board. I didn't realize how much resin it was going to soak up. The basswood was really dry. And so it was probably like 40, 50 pounds when I had finished shaping it. And then after it was glassed, yeah, we weighed like 80 pounds. And the only way that I could get it to the beach was me and a friend carrying it, like each had one side. And then once you got it in the water, it like barely floated, right? So it was like just sitting right below the surface of the water. And once you got the thing going, it was just crazy kind of experience. What I imagine it would be like riding one of those old Hawaiian logs. But I yeah, it was also kind of scary. Like you didn't want to be surfing that board with anyone else around, and you definitely couldn't put a leash on it. Not that you would want to, but kind of scary, rip your leg off or kill somebody kind of surfboard. So I've only
That
probably
is
surfed it a handful of times, and it was fun, but it was more of a, yeah, just like it's like a piece of furniture. I still have it outside my shop, and I I don't know what to do with it actually. It's so
that's
heavy.
insane. You got to keep it. I mean,
Yeah,
you're gonna at some point in the future, if you ever got rid of it, you would regret it for sure.
totally, totally. Yeah, that's why I'm holding on to it.
That's insane. Um, so I guess you kind of talked about what you did professionally outside of board building, but lead me into that. What brought you to New York? Was it work? And what exactly did you do education wise to prepare you for that?
Yeah, so I went to a small liberal arts school in Virginia called Christopher Newport University, and I studied creative writing. And I moved back to Richmond and worked with a master carpenter that I had been working with over summers during undergrad. And I was working with him for maybe a year and a half and feeling very stir crazy. Like, what am I doing with my life? I don't want to be in the town that I grew up in. I want to see the world. I want to get out of Richmond. And I felt like I was pretty good at the creative writing thing, at poetry specifically. So I just decided that I was gonna try to like look at the 10 best or top programs in the country for poetry, for an MFA in poetry. I would just apply to a few of them and see if I got in just on a chance. And so I applied to three or four, I think, like Boston, UVA, and Brooklyn College, and I got into a few, and one was Brooklyn College, and I knew nothing about Brooklyn, but I was like, man, it seems like a really cool place to live, and I would love to check it out. So yeah, totally on a whim. Like I don't think that I'd ever been to Brooklyn before.
Wow.
I put like all my stuff in a U-Haul and just moved to Brooklyn, and I didn't have any friends. Like nobody. I knew nothing, man. I moved to Flatbush, and this was like 12 years ago. It's kind of like a rougher part of Brooklyn, and I lived in the bottom on the bottom floor in a room of a house with a Chinese family that didn't speak any English. I mean, dude, I was like so out out of my comfort zone coming from like suburban Virginia. It was awesome. And the program was incredible. I met some really cool people. It was a 2-year program. So I ended up getting a master's in poetry and yeah, master's of fine arts. And during that time period, I had met somebody in my program who was also an artist, and he and his wife owned a business doing glass design. So like glass sculpture and chandeliers. They had a big project at the time, and they needed some help. And he knew that I had a background in just making things in sculpture, so I started working with them, and that turned into a like a business, and I was a partner in their business for about 3 years, and we did some really cool big projects, really high end like custom glass work. And during that time period, I also had my own art studio in Brooklyn, so I was making paintings and other art, and on the like on the side I was making all this art, and I was like, ah man, I really miss that idea of building surfboards. So I'm gonna go to this little reclaimed lumber spot right next door to my the building where my studio is in, and I got them to mill some wood for me, and I started trying to construct boards much lighter than my first board. So I was looking at grain at the time. There weren't many like instructionals at this point, you know, like you could look on YouTube. There were a few things and they were super vague and not very helpful. So I ended up actually like, you know, those really crazy like grain surfboard constructions where it has the struts and the ribs and everything's all drilled out and laser cut and perfect. Well, I built a couple boards like that, but all by hand. So I was like drilling all the holes by hand and doing all the little miter joints and all that. Um, and it was crazy labor intensive. Like maybe took me 100 hours to build one board and to glass it and do
Wow.
all that. So anyways, yeah, from like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but somehow the my background in poetry and creative writing, it going through that program, it just taught me about be how to be really intentional about whatever it is that you're whatever it is that you're involved in, right? And so my professors would say, like, how do you approach whatever craft it is masterfully, right? Um, because otherwise, what do you want to be? You want to be a dabbler, a hobbyist, right? Or do you want to be a master? And if you want to be a master at anything that you pursue, what does that look like? And how do you um, sharpen your tools and perfect your craft in a way and be intentional about every little detail so that you can succeed, whatever that means, succeed for yourself, do the things that you have in your head and do it to the level or caliber that you envision. So yeah, going from the poetry writing to the chandelier business to surfboard building, somehow there's like a thread through that that's, you know, all obviously creative and building things with your eye or your hand. But yeah, it's kind of random. People are always like, how did you wind up building surfboards and starting a surfboard company in New York? But yeah, just kind of I flow with things like that, I guess.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense though when you tell the story. Just as an aside, what were you planning to do with the MFA in poetry?
That is a great question, man. And I don't have an answer for it. That's the same question that my mom asked me repeatedly while I was in school for poetry. I mean, she thought that I was gonna be a professor or something, which is obviously not an easy thing to do. That's such a niche little corner of the academic world. And I don't know that I would be cut out for it, but it was never on my radar being a
Yeah.
professor. I just loved poetry, and I also at the time I probably wasn't, not probably, I was 0% thinking about my future. I was just like, all right, I'm gonna move to New York and have some fun and learn about poetry, and I'll figure it out from there. So
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, because you're working along the way, right? It's not, you are always taking care of yourself and you have skill sets that you can rely on. So it's not completely wayward.
right, right.
Um, so what I know you're in Rockaway now. What brought you eventually from the city to Rockaway? And first of all, when you moved to New York, did you have any awareness of surfing and what the surf scene was like? Because you were so passionate about it prior to landing there.
Yeah, so I stopped surfing while I was living in Richmond because I was working full time as a carpenter, and yeah, I just couldn't get to the beach. Yeah, like a 2 hour drive, and so I loved it, but it wasn't something that I was willing at that moment to like leave my life for to go to a beach community. And well, hmm, I didn't know that there was surfing in New York. I don't know that many people were talking about it at that point. It was kind of on the DL, and uh, but my friend had told me that there was a really cool surf shop in the city, and my friend who got me into surfing originally, and he told me that I had to check it out. He had never been, but he heard that there was this really cool surf shop called Mollusk in the city, and I think I had moved here, and with the window of time that I moved there, it had already shut down. I think that it shut down like right when I moved here, and that was before uh, Christian Teal had branched off and started Pilgrim. Um, but anyway, so I had it in my head that there was at least like some kind of surf shop or surf culture here, but I didn't know anything about the beach or waves. And my buddy who got me into surfing, he wound up coming up to visit me in New York, and it happened to line up for a really good swell. And he was like, "Dude, we're going to Rockaway Beach and we're gonna surf, and I'm gonna bring my board, and there's supposed to be waves." And I was like, "All right, I don't even know where that is, right?" Because I'd only lived in New York for a couple months, and it happened to be like this really incredible hurricane swell. And I remember driving up and walking up to the boardwalk and just be like, "What the fuck, dude? I cannot believe that there are waves like this so close, like off the subway line from where I live." And from that moment on, it kind of ruined the life that I the life that I was living in New York, because I was working in Soho at the time, and I was living in Brooklyn, and then suddenly I was like, taking the train every morning before and after work to surf. And even like when the subway wasn't running, I was getting on the bus with like a 9.6 longboard. So it was like a really rapid shift in my direction of my New York life. And I found out about a little bungalow that was available to rent here in Rockaway, super cheap, like the cheapest of anything that I had heard of in New York at the time. And so it was a no-brainer. It was like I just put my stuff and moved like I do, I guess. And so I wound up here about, yeah, right after Hurricane Sandy. It was, yeah, about 10 years ago.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and so I've lived here ever since.
Wow. Okay. So I would imagine that's where board building kind of took over your life and profession.
Yeah, that also was just by chance. So I had that seed in the back of my head about building boards, and I had built a couple wooden boards in my studio in Brooklyn. Well, when I was living out in Rockaway, the surf community here is really tight and super passionate, as it is, in most parts of the world. But I didn't, at least I didn't know of anybody local at the time who was building boards. And um, I was like in my own little clique here in Rockaway, so I wasn't aware that there were a couple other people building boards. But I was like, man, where's the like local guy that you could go to get a board? And so I had it in my head that maybe I could do that I could fulfill that role, which was like, looking back on it, just like crazy naive, and I was 25 years old. But I happened to just be driving by the marina where my current shop is, and the gate was open, and it's a gated marina. So the gate just happened to be open because somebody was leaving, and I drove in with a friend of mine because I had told him that I was looking for some space to make art or to build boards. I didn't know. I kind of wanted to build some surfboards. They happened to have just finished building a couple studios. They had like 3 or 4 of them, and they were all available. And it was crazy cheap, like $350 a month for this little studio. I was like, oh shit, man, this is my opportunity if there ever was one. Because it was so cheap, and it was the perfect footprint for building boards. Um, and so just by chance, because of that room, I feel like there was the opportunity to start ball surf. Otherwise, I wouldn't have. I was looking at a bunch of different places, garages, but nothing felt like it was feasible or a viable uh, option. And yeah, this little room at the marina just like opened a door, and then I started building the boards, and it took off from there.
Um, where did you get, I mean, eventually you start making polyurethane boards rather than wood boards. Um, when did you connect with the local building community, and where do you get supplies from?
Oh man, the local building community, that took a while. I don't know that the local community was the most welcoming. And I understand that more with some hindsight. Um, seeing me as somebody who was more than just an out of towner. I wasn't even from New York, and then I showed up in Rockaway, and I just started building some boards and not knowing hardly anything about anything, right? I think that some of the local crew felt like that was disrespectful, or yeah, uh, I was just like blissfully unaware and excited about what I was doing, so I didn't understand that kind of aspect of the culture here, at least in New York. So yeah, I was really on my own. I'd reached out to people and had mentioned, that I was building boards, would love to grab a beer with them, chat about board building or whatever. And that wasn't really met with too much excitement. So, anyways, yeah, I was just like kind of on my own, doing my thing, uh, getting supplies. I think at the time I was getting almost everything from Greenlight Surf Supply in Jersey. So all my blanks and yeah, at the time I wasn't glassing, so I was just getting PU foam, US blanks, really standard stuff, just like standard basswood stringers and standard rockers and density, all that. I was in no place to even consider all the different options for all these things at that point. I was just shaping some boards for like some buddies, word of mouth, at that point. And then almost like pretending like it was a real business, like in a fun way, like, oh yeah, my surfboard business, like I'll make a website, I'll make an Instagram. And those were like real early days of Instagram too, so you could kind of like instantly look like you were somebody doing something, they were like blue
Totally.
checks or anything. It's like, oh yeah, this guy has a surfboard shop, he's building surfboards. um so yeah, it was like kind of an easy time to do it maybe, and had it took off like a life of its own. So
Um, who did you, I mean, it's blows my mind that you weren't really mentoring under anybody or learning the ropes. It just seems like the learning curve would be so much longer. And you mentioned that you weren't even glassing boards yet, but from what I see of your work today, it looks like you're an incredibly, astute laminator, especially your color work looks insane. And so I'm just curious kind of about that process. And was there a point where you could work under somebody and learn those ropes?
yeah, oh man, it's funny to hear you say that it was a quick learning curve, because it felt like um a lifetime, man, of really hard, like hard painful, painfully discouraging chapters, like one chapter after another of just fuck up after fuck up, you know? Um, and I guess, because you're not trying, you don't want to show all of that to the world or talk about it so much. Um, but I have a few close friends who would come and sort of helped out or were trying to learn how to billboards too over the years, that were almost like shop apprentices under me. Somebody hardly knew anything, but I knew a lot more than these people. Um, yeah, buddies who had just seen me go through like the whole madness of trying to figure out glassing. So shaping is its own, obviously, like its own sculpture art form that's super intricate, and every little detail is so critical, right? But at least you're not like under the gun time wise, right? But with the laminating, it's just a whole other, the chemistry and the exactitude that's required to when your goal is to be like the dudes in the, like Moonlight Glassing or the Guild or whoever, and you're starting from zero. Oh man, it's painful. I felt like I was a really um capable person, and like it shouldn't be that hard, right? It's like, oh, how hard can it be? I watch people do it in a YouTube video and it looks like pretty, what, you're just using a squeegee and pouring some resin on the board and flipping some laps. Like, how hard can that be? And yeah, it's amazing actually, not just how difficult the skill set is to acquire and how much time it takes, to hone those skills, like the dance of the whole thing, but how much how contingent your finished product is on the materials that you use, right? And when you don't know what materials other people are using, even things like tape or the types of blades or the type of resin or the specific types of glass or whatever, right? All those little things wind up getting you that perfectly clean cut lab, no bleed, super sharp, crisp, no like no gouging of the foam, all those things. Um, so knowing what tools to use, what kind of materials to use, all those things, it was totally shooting in the dark. I didn't even know where people got their materials, right? So me going to Greenlight, I mean, they have most or all the things that you need, right? But you don't know where to start. You're like, oh, there's like 20 different types of tape. Which one do I use for cut labs? And at this time, especially, there wasn't like a guideline for, oh yeah, use this kind of tape for this and this kind of tape for this. Um, so yeah, really trial and error at that point, right? So it was like I started out, this was the other level of stupid, uh was that I started out wanting to do like the eco green thing. All right, that's great, well intentioned, right? But I started out only using this kind of a epoxy called entropy resin, right? And it was like
Yeah.
a sap, pine sap based.
Bio-based resin.
Yeah. And because I didn't know how it compared to polyester resin, because I never messed with polyester resin because of the fumes or whatever, I was just like, I'm not gonna mess with that. um I didn't know what like the depth of the nightmare it was to work with in comparison, because I had nothing to compare it to. So I only was laminating with this epoxy for the first couple of years that I was glassing. And what I was trying to make the epoxy do was look like poly, right? And that is such a difficult thing to do for
Yeah.
a myriad reasons, um but mainly because it's, it's just not the same viscosity, right? It's like a really thick kind of sticky honey like substance. And for me to get it to saturate and to get the clean, because I wanted to do like really perfectly saturated clean resin tints, right? And with epoxy, it's just a whole different ballgame. Because it wants to pool, and it wants to aerate the foam. It doesn't like hug the shape. Like polyester resin, it like really hugs the shape at the end as it's curing. Epoxy wants to kind of like fall, right? So you'll like actually have laps just fall off the board if you're not like babying the thing. So the lamination itself might take 30 minutes, right? Which is really long compared to poly, but I didn't know what I was doing, and the cure times are so much longer. So yeah, let's say that it took me like 30 minutes to laminate the thing. For the next 3 hours, I would have to constantly be checking on the board to make sure that there were no bubbles, or it's like breathing air from the stringer, or things just falling off. Or I mean, it was just like in dude, it was neurotic. It was fucking crazy, man. Because I would do laminations late at night and be like, oh yeah, I just want to get it done, do it, and then I'd be setting my alarm to wake up in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., to go in the shop to check on it, to cut laps, because it would be like 4 or 5 hour waiting period depending on the temperature. Whoa, man, it was a wild ride. So, anyways, yes, that was in like utter insanity. I really didn't have a life outside of board building at this point. And I wound up, through a friend of a friend, I wound up getting in touch with a really talented glasser from California. And he said that I chatted with him on the phone, and I asked him if he could come help me for a month, just bang out a bunch of orders. And he said that he was really experienced with the same epoxy that I had been using, maybe one of the best in California, and that was using that epoxy. And he also glassed with poly. And we agreed on a price and how many boards we were going to do. And yeah, and he flew out. And over the course of a month, we worked on all these boards, right? That I had shaped. Well, we started out with epoxy, and after like a couple days watching him glass with it, I'm in no way trying to toot my own horn, but I felt like I could laminate a cleaner board with the epoxy than he could. And he was supposed to be like one of the best, but I had made all the mistakes and was doing very unconventional things to wet out my laps, and like my whole technique was just like a totally different thing than what you would read about online. So anyways, was watching him do this, and I was like, man, this is crazy, because I thought that this guy was supposed to be like one of the best. Anyway, so he had like given up on epoxy a long time ago, and he was like, dude, let me show you what real board building looks like. Like you don't understand. And he understood where I was coming from, because he kind of had the same trajectory. He had started out just trying to do epoxy, and then he had started doing poly, and had learned from really great board builders, and like Roger Hines and other people. So he knew his shit, and he was like, let me just let's get some poly, and I'm going to show you how to do it. And I was like, oh my god, I really don't want to do this, but it was like it was fate or something. We ended up buying a 55-gallon drum of resin, and then it was like, dude, a whole new world. Like overnight, it was like, oh, this can be a real business. Before, it really was like a hobby that was masquerading as a business. And then suddenly it was like, holy shit, man, this is how people do it. He showed me so many of the tricks that had been handed down, through like the California lineage, because he had learned from different people, from Matt Calvani and from Roger Hines and other people. He had learned a lot of these tricks that he was teaching me. And it was like instantly, oh, dude, I know how to do this stuff now, right? It's
Yeah.
telling me like what kind of tape to use and blah, 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 these kind of things. So I'm like, yeah, hugely indebted to Michael Emery, for all of that knowledge that he taught me, and shared with me. you know. And I've always been like tried to be a really open person and just share freely with other people. It was cool to have somebody come into my shop and just like hand over these like indelible tools to me that, you know, I'll carry for the rest of my board building career.
Um, was there a difference in the quality between the epoxy boards that you had been laminating before, the epoxy glass jobs versus the poly glass jobs?
Quality, yeah, for sure. I mean, there were a lot of things that I guess that I didn't even know either to look for, or that I knew that other people were paying attention to, like little things that maybe bothered me, but I didn't know that if it was a big deal, right? Because my conversations were so limited. I didn't have anybody to speak to about this stuff in the surf industry. So if I thought that something looked messy, just looking at other boards, maybe on Instagram, like I don't know, maybe that's just like acceptable, right? But then when I had other professionals from the industry show up in my shop and be like, this is why you do this like this, so that you get this finished quality or whatever finish. Um, yeah, it just totally shifted. Kind of gave me like a some kind of structure to work within. Like, oh, this is like the benchmark, and I want to go above it, but at least I knew like what I was shooting for to be at least like at par with some of the best in the industry. Um, the quality of the epoxy boards, I'd say that like I was doing really good work, but I don't know about the epoxy, honestly. It's really interesting. Like, I don't know if it's like a brilliant marketing campaign or what about with the epoxy, but they never felt like as strong as everyone claimed them to be. They felt like, you know, they really do flex. So you would get like pressure dense. They wouldn't crack like poly, but it was like, it was almost like the resin was just like a bit soft, right? Like always a bit soft. Um, and but yeah, that could also just be that super sap, the entropy resin that I was using. um I don't know, man. I actually have one of the first longboards that I ever glassed with entropy resin in my shop right now. Somebody just brought it by for some ding repair, and I was looking at it like, wow, man, this is like actually not a bad looking board. And yeah, man, it's held up really, really well. It's like 6 years old, and it
Hmm.
looks still beautiful. So I guess, you know, it's pretty good quality.
So have you abandoned epoxy altogether at this point?
Yeah, I only do it for ding repair. You know, I do like
Okay.
a little bit of ding repair on the side just for friends. Nothing like proper professional, but I mean you know, my ding repair is definitely professional, but I'm not trying to do ding repair. It's just, you know, if I have friends reach out. Um, but yeah, I don't really like, I don't have any desire. I actually have all that epoxy still, and it's still good. It's like crazy expensive, man. Like 10 times more expensive than poly. Um, so yeah, I'm just like sitting on, I don't know, like 40 gallons of epoxy in the shop, and like, what am I gonna do with that? I put it on Craigslist a couple times, nobody reaches out. Anyways, yeah, I don't really have any desire to go back down that path. Even though
Yeah.
if anybody out there who hears this podcast is struggling with epoxy, feel free to reach out, because I definitely have a unique technique or method that I don't think, I've never heard anybody do it the way that I did it. And I'd love to share it with other people if they're like concerned with doing epoxy. Oh,
Um,
hold on one sec. I think my
yeah, go for it.
dog is barking for
Go
me
for
to
it.
come in. Okay, yeah. Sorry, man. I feel like I'm rambling a lot, but I guess that's what a podcast is.
Yeah. I can give more direction if needed, but I don't need to because this is all quality. Um, so I don't know if this is jumping way too far ahead in the timeline or the development of the business, but I'm really curious to hear you talk about the concept of additions that you
Mm.
do. For listeners, that's additions with an Edition. How did that develop? And can you explain what the concept is?
Yeah, how did that develop? Hmm. So the, the how did it develop? I think it actually began. The conversation around it began with my girlfriend, who is so far removed from the surf world, has never surfed, doesn't even really like the ocean. Um, and so, anyways, having conversations with her as like a real outsider from surf world, surf culture, industry, has been super helpful because she so easily can question all of these things that are just taken as normal within the industry, right? Should,
Yeah.
like, simple things like pricing, like, oh, why does it cost that? Oh, because that's what they cost. Oh yeah, but you don't have to charge what everybody else charges, right? And so when it came to the board building, I think conversations around like what I really want to do, right? um rather than how do I survive, I guess, how do I just get through, um that helped me sort of envision what it might look like to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. So I was getting
Yeah.
really disenchanted uh by all the custom order work, right? Which is sort of the industry standard if you're in this corner of the surf industry where you're like a hand shaper, hand board builder. You, it's almost a given that you have to give your customer all the options, right? So it's, not just color work and shape and fin setup and those things, but like even pin lines and resin panels and all the stuff, right? So it's like kind of all on the table, and it's normally an itemized check. Like, oh, the price for a pin line is plus 50, and for cut laps is this, blah blah blah. And something always felt stupid about that to me. Like, why am I? It's not like that. It's not like production line like that where you just, you push a button and then you put on the pin lines, or you do this, do that. So I really wanted to get away from the custom board building thing, right? Uh, because it invariably set me up for uh, like, your customer is going to have some kind of expectation about what that's going to look like. They've done a little doodle on a piece of paper and sent it to you and said, oh yeah, I want it to be like an orangey red, right? And like, okay, yeah, orangey red, that's really vague. All right, I'll make it an orangey red. And then you give it to them and they're like, oh my gosh, that's way too red. I was thinking more orange. And I actually got into some weird situations where I actually had somebody like try to take me to court over a board that was like too orange and not red enough. So that's like a real example of just the insanity of some shit, I guess, that happens. I don't know if that's happened to anybody else, but yeah, like, I didn't want to ever deal with that kind of crap again. I was like, man, I just want to build what I want to build. And if people want to buy it, great. And if they don't, then I'll just surf them. and and maybe that just puts me out of business, but like, at the end of the day, I don't want to be. It felt like I was just kind of a slave to whatever whim the customer had, and they could change their mind at any moment, and then there's all the back and forth about every little change, and I'm having to read through all these email threads, and oh, actually, I wrote a mid-length last weekend, and so I'm thinking I don't want to do the longboard after all. And you've had all these conversations about the right board for them that nobody even knows. It was just like, felt crazy, and I'm doing this all on my own. I was like, wow, how do I get out of this? So um I think that's, where the concept of the edition sort of started. I wanted to not only do something that felt more in line with my interests for art and for design, but I wanted to try to create a body of work that I could get customers to sign up for ahead of time, but they wouldn't know what it looks like, right? So it was just like blind faith. They had to trust me on what I was going to produce, right? So especially for that first edition, uh yeah, I mean, talk about blind faith. I mean, these customers like kind of had no clue what I was gonna make. But yeah, like had normally like face-to-face conversations with them in my shop, and I would just say, hey, I'm gonna build really beautiful surfboards. They're gonna be colorful, but like really tasteful, minimal. Like that's just the Paul Surf style. And you just kind of got to trust me on this one. And I was really surprised that I got 10 people, 12 people, whatever, to sign up for the edition. So I do editions of 13 boards. I just finished my third one. It looks like I'll probably just do one a year from now on. But yeah, that's kind of the idea. You sign up for a specific shape, and I do have that conversation with the customer, right? It's not just whatever I make. I do shape the board for them, so exact dimensions and even things like rocker, fin, whatever. um, that's all custom, but then all the glass work, the finish work is left up to me. So be, that also allows me to really see a concept through, right? Because there's so much creative stuff that's going on in the surf industry, especially now with lamination, and color work. But oftentimes it's like one board or like one or two boards, and it just never felt like it had like a real impact to me. Maybe coming more from like the art perspective, it always felt like, just a one-off. Like, oh yeah, I threw some resin with some color on a board like this and it kind of looked cool once, but to have a concept and really try to execute it well repeatedly over and over felt like, the intentionality that I was curious about. So that's sort of where the the addition stems from, I guess. Yeah, I was just like trying to do it 13 times in a row.
Um, was there anybody else who had done a similar concept, or were you the first?
I don't know anybody else that has done it.
I don't either.
Maybe, yeah, maybe you know of somebody, but yeah, I would see people put out, oh, like, you see these shots of Josh Hall's boards in front of Holy Smoke JP, and it's like, like 30
Yeah.
impeccably glass, perfectly polished, beautiful shapes, right? But they're just going in a surf shop. Um, and yeah, I just felt like I wanted to do something that was super professional, beautiful, well curated like that, but be able to experiment with different things that I had in my head. And before edition, I had ideas about different ways to laminate or different techniques, right? I had those in my head, but I never could carve out the time to actually mess around, right? I'd only be able
Right.
to do it occasionally for personal boards, but the time that was allotted for that was so tiny, like the tiniest fraction of what I was spending on all the custom work. And so yeah, it was like, well, I gotta create that space, and that's what the edition is going to be. So everyone that reaches out for a custom board for now on, when we started the edition, it's like we're going to steer them toward edition, and we're going to make the custom price higher, sort of to dissuade people who aren't really that hell bent on a specific design
Yeah.
to choose an edition, and then I get to do whatever I want. And then for the people who really, really want something super specific, they can pay more, and then I'll still do whatever it is that they want.
Yeah. It it's such a smart solution. Um, you're right. You needed an outside person, your girlfriend in that case, to really just question why things are done the way that they're done, because it's so stupid the way that things are done. Like the shaper doing individual customs for every single customer really puts so much power and control in the hands of the customer, who mostly doesn't have any clue what they're ever talking about. You know what I mean? And like you said, then they change their mind. The other thing is it zaps so much of the shaper's time. Just that's the one consistent that I hear when I interview people. Usually it's off air when they tell me this, but it's just the amount of time dedicated towards um, communicating with customers about what they want or think they want, and then whatever is half of the battle. That's more than half of the time. The shaping is the easy part, you know?
Totally.
So what you're doing really does wrench the creative kind of control back into your position. And I think, to be perfectly honest, most customers probably want you to take control anyways. If you give them control and say they can order whatever they want, then they will take it. But for you, it's like going to a restaurant where it's like a prefix menu or whatever, and the chef is like, I've got this. I know what I'm doing. Sit back for the ride and I'll prepare a meal for you. You know, rather than asking the customer, put the menu aside and just tell me what you want, and then I'll go make it for you. That makes no sense at all.
Totally, dude. Yeah, that's a great metaphor. I mean, and I, they're just different types of customers, but I am totally the kind of person who wants to pay the premium price to go to the chef who is just like knows what the fuck they're doing, and you
Totally.
let them just do their thing, and you just get to have that experience. Okay, just like give me your best, like go for it, and everybody wins in that situation. The person feels respected, you feel like you're getting the best thing possible, and everybody just feels good about that experience rather than nitpicking little details. You're like, well, this isn't exactly what I ordered,
Yeah,
I thought that, I don't know.
completely. Yeah, it's smart. So tell me about edition 3, because that's really, I've been following your work for a while, but when I saw the color work that you were doing on those boards and the amount of engineering that went into kind of achieving the concept, I was blown away. So can you explain what the concept was and then all that engineering and how you achieved it?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been thinking about doing like resin gradient laminations for a long time, since I first saw ones that Superwolf had done, Alex Villalobos, a long time ago. And at the time when I had first seen those images, or even I saw some in person, I was like baffled by how that was even possible. How could you get all the resin to kick the right way? How do you mix the color that perfectly, and blah blah blah. There were so many details, technical details that I were like beyond my understanding at the time. Um,
So before we get too far, gradient is the key word, resin gradient. Can you explain for listeners who maybe
sure.
don't know, what does gradient mean?
Yeah, so I guess there are two different ways to think about it. There would be like a pure gradient, which is something that you would see in the sky at sunset, where you have a color shifting seamlessly from one to another. In Normally that's like a color saturation or intensity changing, right? Super subtle but perfect. And then there's like a stepped gradient. These are terms that I use in my shop, but a stepped gradient, which is normally what you see with resin work, where it's more of a drastic shift from color to color, one sitting next to another. So you might even double the saturation from one to the next to the next to the next, and then you get that really heavy shift of color, but it all has the same base color, right? So you're
Right.
just adding more of that tint over and over to each cup. So yeah, Super Wolf is definitely. Is it funny to call him Super Wolf? Alex Villalobos, he's like definitely the master, right? He's like the guy that people emulate, even like Wavestorm emulates, right?
Totally.
Um, and for good reason, because nobody does it as clean, and nobody did it first, right? Like he was there and like messing with these ideas, like the long parallel uh gradients, that and his color choice, all of this is like impeccable, and the laminations are so clean and they're never dry. And I mean, yeah, I was just like, hats off to him, right? So I was seeing him and um a few other guys do this kind of work, and I was thinking about how do you, first of all, how do you even do it, which is in its own right like a mystery and very difficult thing to figure out, how to get everything to kick at the right time. And because you're having to mix, right, you're having to mix each cup with the color in it, and each time that you add more color to each cup, you're technically contaminating the resin a little bit, right? So technically, if you want them to all kick at the same time, you need to add a tiny bit more catalyst to each one that has more color, right? But then you have to factor in the time that it takes for you not only to add the catalyst, to mix it, and to pour it, right? And the time that you're doing that is time that the other ones are sitting. And in volume like that, if it's just sitting in a cup, it cures way faster than if you have it poured out on the board, right? So when you have 20 cups of color and it's taking you 20 seconds per cup to do the actual pour, by the time you get to your last cup, there's just a lot of math here to figure
Yeah.
out, right? And the sequencing and the coordinating of all these little details to get everything to land on the board the right way, to be able to pull it all off, and then do a clean lamination and have everything cure right and not drain out. That happens a lot. The color of the resin kind of drains out of the glass if it doesn't cure fast enough. And then you wind up with dry glass, like all bubbly, aerated glass. It's happened to me many times. Um, yeah, these are like the things that will drive you mad if you're OCD about this stuff. Like I guess I am. So I had been doing like little tests over the years, just playing around with, yeah, cups and like pouring resin on the boards, like, really rudimentary stuff. And then I started building my own like racks, little wooden rack with squished cups in each hole. So I would cut out like an elliptical shape and slide a cup into it, and then be able to mix all the colors. And then I would build another one that would hold all of my catalysts, so I could pour all the catalysts in at once, stir them all at once with a different stir rack, and then pour all the color in one go, right? And I'd never seen anybody do that before, but it kind of felt like a no-brainer in a way. It's just like building a tray to hold all your cups so that you could pour them all at once. And then that, man, there have been a lot of iterations of this. It got to I don't know if this is interesting. I guess it will be to somebody out there, but uh, I bought a bunch of popsicle stick molds. Sorry, popsicle molds, right? So they were little steel molds. They were about the right size to do the pour, and I figured out a way to get all of those to be connected, and I could do like 24, I think 24 colors at once. And I had never seen anyone do that many colors in one lamination. And same kind of thing. I had another rack with syringes, and each syringe had the exact amount of catalyst that I wanted to use. And I would depress the whole syringe catalyst rack into the resin, stir it, and do my pour in one go. And this is like the stuff that's super fun for me, right? This is such a departure from like, is the orange red tint the right orange red tint? So yeah, I was like really getting excited about experimenting and about board building again when I was playing around with all this stuff. And then yeah, I guess I just like took it to that next level. So my pores would wind up being really jaggedy and off, sort of off center, because I was holding the thing by hand. So I thought, well, if I want to get something that looks like almost machine shape, machine straight, then I'm gonna need to put some kind of track on the ceiling and hang this rack, um, so that I could just get a really smooth rolling pour. So that's what I did. Yeah, I ended up building a contraption with 42, actually I think I wound up with 52 different tubes in it, so I could fill each tube with a different color. And then it has sort of a trap spring door, latch door at the bottom, so I can open the door and it's just gravity fed. All the resin falls, lands on the board as I roll it over the board, and then I can do my lamination. Uh, yeah, so what I was able to do for edition 3 was, uh, it's actually a almost like seamless gradient. So there's only tiniest shift in intensity of color, but I put clear stripes between. So you wind up with like this striped gradient effect, and it's super clean. I mean, there's like no smear or wiping of colors all over the board. And I think that that's one of the things that I look for, uh, when I'm looking for like expert lamination glasswork. You see a lot of like these acid splash kind of uh, abstracts, resin abstracts, right? Where it's just somebody just throwing resin all over the board, and then all the colors get smeared together. But when you can very carefully pull all the resin off the board directionally and uh, keep the crispness of lines, and that's stuff that you see in Alex's work. That yeah, that it's just like a hallmark of expert lamination craftsmanship to me. So yeah, I was really happy with the result.
Um, how do you pace the pull or the moving the rack down the track? Is that just done by foot and eye, and you're just pacing it yourself? Or yeah, moving the rack
Yeah,
when
just
you're
moving.
pouring the color on the board?
Yeah, just by hand, and it's pretty stressful, man, because it will take me about 4 hours to load the rack, to mix all my color, figure out my catalyst, put all the resin into the rack, and then pull the door. It'll take between 3 and 4 hours just to get to that point to pull the door. So I can only do 2 laminations in one full day, and it's a hardcore, intense day. But yeah, once I open that door, I only have about 4 seconds before it's all drained out of the tube.
4 seconds.
Yeah, so it's like, and then I'm just walking over the board, hoping that there's enough resin to get all the way to the end. Okay, I'm off the board, and then I have to let it sit for a bit, pull off the resin, do my lamination. So it's like very intense, but that's what's fun and kind of
Okay.
addictive.
So that movement of the color is from nose to tail, obviously, or yeah. So vertically, basically. And then explain on edition 3 the gradient itself. What color does it go from and to? And it should be stated, if you weren't clear about it, that spectrum starts on board 1 and ends on board 13. So each individual board has a different spectrum of the gradient that it's colored with. Is that correct?
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about them individually, but yes. So the colors, I don't think that I did a rainbow. I think I very intentionally did not do a rainbow, but each board goes from light saturation or low intensity of color on one side of the board. So let's say that the very first board in the collection, it starts with almost clear on the left hand side. It goes to the richest saturation on the right hand side. So let's say that it was like a pink that went to more of a red. Then the next board would start with its most intense on the left side and go to lighter. So you get this sort of waving of intensity over each board. And I just found a color palette, or made a color palette that I thought was beautiful, and I worked from that. So normally I map all this stuff out on an iPad. You know, I'm just like drawing different colors and trying to figure out how I want the finished piece to look. So I'll have templates for each board, and then I'll actually draw each one out by hand, and that just allows me to, like, rather, I used to do watercolor, which is cool, but you know, it's a lot of time mixing color, and then if you make a mistake, so it's just really easy on the iPad, you know, to erase and to shift things around, move things around. So I try to do those little prototype mock-up drawings before I ever throw resin on a board again, because I've had too many great ideas up here wind up with very
Yeah.
mediocre looking.
Actually, I was curious about that because so much is on the line with that project. Did you botch any of the 13 boards and have to reshape them?
Yeah, I think I had to remake 3.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and that's another thing, I guess, that I don't I'm not sure how much that happens in the industry, and probably for good reason. I mean, those boards are definitely not going to be trash. I'm about to do a little sale at the marina, like a holiday sale. I'm going to sell all of my like sample boards for much cheaper. But yeah, I'm definitely willing to take the time and rebuild boards if I'm not 100% satisfied with the end product. And before the addition, and before, you know, I had other revenue streams, that wasn't an option for me, right? I was just like, it was kind of like the good enough thing, which really like grated against the grain of my soul, like handing off a board where I was like, man, I would redo this if I had the time and the money, but I don't, because I have 20 other people emailing me about their board. And you know, it could be the tiniest thing that nobody will notice, right? But I noticed it, and that stuff never felt right to me, to let go of a board like that. And we're talking about probably just finite details that are so like, it's
Yeah.
purely aesthetic, right? Like the
Yeah.
board's gonna work fine, but I didn't like how the color turned out, or the whatever was not perfect to me. And yeah, so that was cool for this edition. That was the first time that I was like, I don't care if the edition comes out 2 weeks later than I told everybody, but I have to have them all, you know, up to the standard that I have in my head. Because that's fun for me, you know, like in the end, it's just it's just gotta be like, it's what I want to, the way that I want to do it. And it doesn't really matter like how it's done, how anybody else does it. I like have so much respect for the ways that other people are approaching this thing. I think that like I'm in a different, very different world than most people, and I'm often confused, you know, by customers as like another board builder in the industry. And there's like almost like an animosity there too. Like, who do you think you are? Why are your boards so expensive? Why? I get a lot of those kind of questions, and I think that it's just, for me at least, I'm not really concerned what other people are doing, because I'm doing it the way that I want to do it. Uh, and I'm having fun doing it that way, and I'm just figuring out my own way to do it. And like you said, like I think maybe it's more like in the wheelhouse of art rather than, just surfboard manufacturing, even though, I'm pretty confident that the boards can hold their own in that.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to price. Are you comfortable discussing price on the podcast?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
What do you charge for the edition boards?
For the edition boards, I think right now we're charging uh I think it's 1,600 for a short board, 1,800 for a mid length, and 2,000 for a long board.
Okay.
And that's like
And
really cheap compared to custom. Really cheap.
so what is retail pricing for a board, let's say one of your stock models, and then what is custom pricing?
Retail pricing. I don't do that. What do you mean by that? Like if I
I
were
mean,
in a surf shop?
yeah, well, not a surf shop necessarily, but I was on your website and I saw there was a board listed on your shop.
Sorry, yeah. So that's just depending on how I feel about that particular board, how it turned out. Normally those boards that show up on the site, they're boards that I either built for myself or I built for a customer and I didn't like how it turned out, so I remade it and then I had that extra. But for the custom boards, I'm doing 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. So that's short, mid, long, and those are all inclusive prices, so you get whatever you want. And I can it's more of a collaborative thing, right? So I will build the machine to laminate a thing that we have in our head when we have a conversation about something that's beautiful, or you send me a picture of a piece of art that you feel inspired by, and then we try to figure that out. So it's a special kind of experience. I know that number is like, those numbers are shocking to some people, and it's amazing, like some people really get offended by high numbers, um but it's just a different thing, I think, than, you say, oh yeah, well, this great shaper, they only charge $2,000 or whatever. That's awesome, that's so good. I do feel like a lot of people should be charging more money, and that's something that you hear repeatedly in the surf industry.
Yeah.
But then there's this weird kind of self-regulatory thing that happens that I've experienced too, where you raise your price and then people will speak out and like kind of call you out publicly for doing that. Um, Even though everybody wants to make more money. So yeah, big confusion.
Well, it is a very interesting topic, and I'm glad that you're willing to engage in it. My I agree there's a consensus among board builders, and I would say even customers have an understanding and acceptance of it, that prices do need to go up. And customers are willing to pay for quality, and they do in all other aspects of their life. And they will sort out whose boards are worth paying more for than not. Like
Mhm.
the market will decide, as it always does. But the most resistance that I've seen is from the board builders themselves. And I will have this conversation with them and I'll be like, what do you charge for a longboard? And they're like $900. And I'm like, you need to raise your prices. Yeah, and these are people who are having a hard time making ends meet also, and I'll say, you need to raise your prices. Your work is well worth it. You have 30 years of proven experience. The dude who came to pick that board up is driving a Tesla. He has expensive golf clubs in the back of his car. He rides a $10,000 bicycle. You need to charge him more than $900 for the board. And the shaper will be like, so $950 then? Can I get away with $950? I'm like, no, dude, like $2,000 is the right number for the amount of work that goes into it and the amount of cost for the raw materials alone, So
But this is something that's curious to me, actually, too, just because you just mentioned it. And of course, those are the factors to consider, right? Like material costs. But that's something that I see that happens as well, or at least as it pertains to my own work. Um, if you, I don't know, like it's kind of a stupid example, but you take like a beautiful painting and you're not like, yeah, but the canvas only costs this much, and
Right.
the stretcher bars, that's not even good wood. um it's about the finished product and the whatever kind of intentionality went into that thing and the design, whatever. If it moves you, right, is it worth it to you? And if it's not worth it to you, it might be to somebody else. If it's not worth it to anybody, it can still exist in the world and be whatever price it is. But I yeah, it is really curious, like how scared people are to raise their prices because they don't want to like offend other board builders, and they don't want to like let their core surfers down, and they don't want to, but then people are struggling to survive. I was doing the same thing. I think when I started, my prices were like 650 for a short board, 750 for a mid length, and 850 for a long board. And I kept kind of stepping it up, my price, and it got to the point where I was, yeah, I don't know, there was like sort of a tipping point where I was like, all right, well, what is it worth it what is it worth for me to give this amount of my life
Right.
to do this thing? Because I had, nights where I would be in the shop all night alone, working these insane hours. And I don't know, I guess I just kind of had this epiphany moment where, like, well, what am I trying to prove? There's no one here. No one's
Yeah.
like applauding me. There's no audience. There's no like dad to, pat me on the back or tell you I'm so proud of you for working so hard. I'm just like, I'm working myself to death for no money. And it's like, it wasn't fun. This is like insane. But there's like a prevailing atmosphere of machismo in the industry that's like, like the blue collar factory worker like mindset that I think could use a little bit of updating, and not like I just think that people could like check in with themselves a little bit on that and be like, does this make me happy? It like it might be the norm in the industry to charge whatever price or work whatever hours or to use whatever, but I don't know. I
I
feel really lucky that I have some distance from the industry in that sense as well, because I think that if I was working in my friend's glass shop in Oceanside and around that culture, that would be much harder for me to just like say, oh, I'm gonna do my own thing, my own way, and charge whatever I want to charge. Um, but because I'm kind of out here in no man's land, it's like, who
yeah.
cares? Mm.
Yeah. Well, I agree with everything you're saying about viewing it as art and let the market decide what art is worth. But I've always looked at it from a more practical standpoint, which is uh, shapers, laminators, polishers, sanders all cannot afford to live or to buy a home in Southern California any longer. 30 years ago, they could. Now they can't. And they're not increasing the pricing of the boards. They're just now renting apartments instead of buying a home. And beyond that, they're actually getting pushed out of Southern California. So glass shops have been going out of business left and right for the last decade or so. Uh, Lots of things are being outsourced. And so, and then the ones who do remain their prices are going up. So you're going to have a few kind of super high end that will weather the storm, and they will be able to cater to the elite high earning surfers who can afford to buy those things. Or The other option is to buy mass produced and it's available in Costco, or maybe there's a slightly different version of that. And so I would like to think of ways to protect the important kind of pioneered surf board building industry that has always existed in California as a whole, but elsewhere too. So it's like, let's just raise prices marginally so that we can afford to pay the sander a living wage and he doesn't have to go work a construction job instead. Let's just do that because that's practical. That's what every other cottage industry has done as it grew out of cottage into a larger industry.
Totally. Yeah. No, man, I 100% agree. I yeah, I don't know. It's funny. It's really funny how many of these conversations I'll have with other board builders or laminators about prices, and then if they find out my price, they think I've gone off the deep end. They're like, wow,
Well,
now that's crazy, right? Um, yeah, it makes people uncomfortable, but I also feel really like price should be able to be talked about, and not just like talked about, oh, these are being candid about whatever your pricing is, that's great, but also I think that I would like there to be the potential for a conversation about price that's like more fluid, right? Like if you come to me and you really love my work and you really can't afford it, then let's talk about it. I'm not like, especially now that I have some other ways to make money and pay my bills, I like, I want to still build boards for people who can't afford the super high end. Um, and so it hasn't happened yet, but I mention it to people when they tell me, oh yeah, man, I wish I could afford one of your boards. I'm like, oh, well, we should talk about it.
yeah,
And not like, and it's a different thing than like the bro deal kind of conversation where you're just trying to get something cheaper. It's
right.
like, no, I really respect you and your work. I want to pay what you're asking, but I can't. So, but this is what I could afford. Would you consider it? And that I feel like is a really respectful and mature conversation that could happen around price and around the creation of something like this. But I
Yeah.
don't know.
Um, Kind of diverting topics a bit. Can you tell me about your encounter with Pat Curren, the GoFundMe, and then also tell me what we got wrong when we kind of discussed it on our podcast? Because I know you reached out to me at the time. So tell me that whole story.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to really tread lightly here.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna I'll do my best here.
I mean, we can avoid it completely if you'd prefer. I don't want to
No, I don't. I mean,
offend
I don't want
anybody.
to avoid it. Yeah, I can. Let me start with how I met him and his wife and his daughter. I was
Yeah.
just, yeah, surfing at Swami's, and I was walking up the steps um, with a board that I had made, and this woman said, "Oh, that's a really beautiful board you got there." I said, "Oh, thanks." And then she asked if she could see it, and I told her, "Oh yeah, I had made it." She was like, "Oh wow, yeah. Well, my husband would love to see your board." And I said, "All right, cool." I thought I heard her say, "My husband, Pat Curran, would love to see your board," but it was like under her breath, and like no way she just said that. And so I walked back to my car, um, thinking that I had misheard her, and I was talking to my girlfriend and a couple other friends, and I was, I think that she said, I think this woman said that her husband was Pat Curran. And I gotta go walk over to this car and go see if I misheard her or not. So I walked over with my board and Pat was sitting in the front seat, and he got out of the car, and I mean, I instantly recognized him and shook his hand, and we spoke for a little bit, and it turned into, maybe, I don't know, we were standing in the car parking lot there at Swami's for like 3 hours, I think. I was still in my wetsuit
Crazy.
for like 3 hours, just like sweating in my wetsuit, but I so excited to be able to talk with Pat, and he was telling me stories about shaping for Velzy, and yeah, what it was like building like production balsa boards, uh, in that heyday in the late 50s, early 60s. And yeah, it was really felt surreal, right? Because I was only I was actually leaving the next day. And I had only been in California for like a week, and I just happened to run into Pat and Mary in the parking lot. I didn't knew nothing about Pat Curran really. Had only things that I had read, and um, didn't know where he lived. I didn't know if he was living in California or where. Anyways, so um, it started. I exchanged. No, Pat doesn't have a phone. That probably comes as no surprise to anybody who knows anything about him. But Mary, his girlfriend, our partner, has a phone, and she gave me her number, or I gave her my number. Anyways, we stayed in contact, and for like the next, I don't know, 5 6 months, we spoke very frequently on the phone. Uh, and I talked to Pat, and I talked to her, and she told me about their situation, and it seemed to be getting more dire as the conversations went. I already knew that it was really rough just from seeing their car in the Swami's parking lot, because it was packed with stuff, and their daughter, who has special needs, was clearly in a tough situation as well. And um, so I was certainly concerned with a way to help if I could, and I didn't know what that might look like. And I had offered a few different, I don't know, like if I could just come out there and help them clean up their house, or because I had FaceTime with them, and I'd seen how they were living, and it just looked tough, like not not the way that someone, especially at Pat's age, should be going out, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I was confused too. Like I knew that there had to be more to the story, but it also like really wasn't my place like to dig or to pry into that. Um, so anyhow, yeah, like we were trying to figure out a way to help. This is not just me, but um, a friend of mine who is a partner in the business, and my girlfriend and his girlfriend. We were all kind of like in conversation with Mary and Pat, and trying to figure out what they needed. Just like sort of every conversation that I had with her was, how can I help you? Like what do you need? It sounds like you need some money for groceries, and it sounds like you need blah blah. So yeah, like the conversation got around to doing a GoFundMe, um, which she was really hesitant about, for obvious reasons, I guess, just because Pat's such a public figure in the surf community. Um, and I was trepidatious too. I thought that it could gain some momentum, but I really had no idea that it would take off like it did. I knew that we were going to do our best to have it get that kind of momentum, to try to gain as much financial help as we could for them. With that kind of thing with a GoFundMe, you kind of like, you have to hit it really hard. And so I had written out as best I could, like very concise story of sort of the progression of our relationship, their dire situation, and what they needed for in terms of financial help. And um yeah, I posted it, and then it turned into this big thing. I don't know, it's been a couple of years, so, and I haven't thought about it too much since. But yeah, yeah, I understand. You know, I spoke to Tom Curran's wife, and I spoke to other people in the family, sort of on the side, and I was trying to understand why they were so upset, because from our perspective, we were just like,
Trying to
"We
help.
understand, like, yeah, we were just trying to help, and we thought that, um yeah, I mean,
So
it's
for listeners, to
obvious.
bring them up to speed, uh, the GoFundMe was very well received, I remember, from funders, from average surf fans who wanted to support the cause.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the family, kind of in contrast to that, the family was upset about the plight, Pat Curran's plight being publicized, essentially. That's the way that it looked like to me. Is that true?
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay,
I think that the
got it.
family didn't want, um, the spotlight, shown on any aspect of their personal life, and I totally, understood that. I also didn't really feel like we had tread into that space. Like, if you
I
really look
agree.
at the words of the GoFundMe, we all that we said was that the family did the best that they could, and we all know that family dynamics are insanely nuanced and difficult, and most families are not groovy, perfect, happy, loving environments. There's like years and years of inherited baggage and shit. So we didn't even want to go anywhere near that, right? So it was just like everybody's tried their best, and they're still in this really rough situation. So wouldn't it be cool if we could kind of like celebrate who Pat is on his birthday, and try to help he and his family out and get them out of a tough situation where they can't even afford rent, for
Yeah,
their trailer park. Um and I feel like it was such positive feedback in the initial couple days of the GoFundMe, where we raised, I don't know, like 60 something thousand dollars. Um and then it was, yeah, I don't know. From my perspective, at least, it felt really unfortunate that the family was so, or certain members of the family were really outspokenly against it, because it felt not only like it sort of cut the wire, like, on that energy, that good positive energy, but it shifted like conversation away. Like, nobody, it didn't feel like
that's a
anybody was.
great point.
I mean, there were definitely a few people who were like, oh, how could Tom let his father wind up wasting away like this? Or, but I mean, we're talking about the tiniest fraction of the amount of comments of people that truly adored Pat, knew him personally, that had spent time traveling with him, or even just surfed with the man one time, and that one experience was so deeply impressed in their memory that they could like recall exactly the way that he surfed and the date that they served to the. I mean, it was incredible. Even the number of emails that people didn't see, some stuff came in on Instagram, and I was just getting emails from people, like old friends of Pat's from Mexico or from Costa Rica, that, yeah, that, that was forwarding to them so Mary could read these stories to Pat, and he'd be like, oh wow, I haven't heard from that guy in a while. It was really I thought, a really beautiful thing. And I was sad to see it go in that direction. And I do respect and understand how it could be taken that way. I don't know. I
Well, I think as you're talking about it, you're right. The way that you guys wrote that story, there was no, I don't even remember there being a reference to his family not stepping up. It was strictly about Pat and his wife or partner or whatever and their daughter could use help. There was some specifics, even like dental work or whatever, rent maybe it was. And so as a community, like if you're interested, if you love Pat or you have any admiration for what his contributions were to surfing, then feel free to make a contribution. I don't remember there even being a reference to any other family members. So by them becoming upset and vocalizing about it, it almost made it now about them not supporting him, you know, where that was never even referenced in the first place. So yeah, I thought
And then I
you
felt like I was trying to defend myself, and it put me in this weird position where, okay, yeah. Then I felt like I was guilty of something. It was
right,
amazing
right.
how quickly it shifted almost instantaneously. It was like, bam! And suddenly I felt really bad, like I had
You didn't
crossed
need
this
to. I mean,
line and really like hurt this family on some deep level, and and it was yeah, like dude, it was kind of rough.
so
um
with hindsight, I know you said you haven't thought about it in a few years, but with hindsight now, would you have managed that any differently?
and with hindsight, I think I'd do everything differently, but I think I did the best I could at the time with the knowledge that I had. I've spent more time with Pat and Mary since, and I think, the more that you learn about them and their unique dynamic as a couple, and um, their situation, it's such a unique one that I don't think an amount of money or could help. At least there, yeah. Stop there. Like
So
uh,
did
money definitely helped them with a few of the things that we mentioned in the GoFundMe. Pat got dental work done that he desperately needed. He has like a nice set of teeth now, um, and he got to get to the doctors a few times. I even went with him one time. Um, yeah, he so there were some essential things that were covered. um Even paying back like old debts to friends. I know that Mary told me that she was able to use some of that money to pay people back because they'd been leaning pretty hard on friends for a long time before this, before they wound up in this situation. And she said, that was just like a big weight off their shoulders. So it's not that the money didn't do anything. Obviously, like it
good.
did some good, but also that number seems like a lot to some people. Numbers are funny because it always seems like a lot to some people and a little to other people. But at least from, I know, having spoken to Mary about all of this stuff, very openly, that $75,000 is like nothing when you're the caregiver for an almost 90-year-old man, and you also have a special needs daughter, and you have no income, right?
Yeah.
That's gone in a year. So I think yeah, I just remember reading a lot of comments about how much money this was, and there needs to be strict accounting for every cent that's spent and blah. And I would read these things to Mary, and she would just laugh like, these people clearly aren't caregivers for somebody who, for a special needs daughter, like severe special needs daughter, and a man who like needs a lot of medical attention. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Well,
yeah,
good. I'm glad to hear the follow-up to that.
yeah.
So um, but let's move on from that. I have a couple of wrap-up questions for you. I'm curious if you ever ride other shapers surfboards.
Do you always ask this question? I feel like I've heard you ask this question before. No?
Not exactly always, but certainly I've asked it a
Yeah,
number of
I like
times.
it. It's good. Um, I don't currently, well, a board that I always return to, I have a 67 Hobie. Um, it's like really clean, beautiful dog fin, a dog bone fin box, like first D fin, removable D fin log. I surf that a lot. Um, I'm currently surfing it always because I don't have a longboard. I always sell my own boards and then I don't have time to make myself another. So then I always wind up riding this old Hobie, which I really love, but it's kind of funny. I'm never surfing my own board. So technically, yeah, I'm always surfing this old Hobie like the past few months. Um, but like, yeah, current board builders, I don't think I own anybody else's work, but it's also not because I don't want to, but it's because I can't afford to buy other people's boards. Is so funny because I always tell people when they're like, "Wow, your boards are so beautiful, but they're so expensive. I can't afford one." And I'm like, "Yeah, I couldn't afford it either, but I totally understand. Like lucky people who can afford these boards." But I definitely like. I really look up to some different board builders and laminators. But yeah, I don't currently write anybody else's work.
What would you be interested in getting if you could order one board from anybody right now? What would it be?
Oh man, I don't know. It's just really cliche, but I think I'd probably want to get just an egg from Skip Fry. Um, yeah, I would just I've never surfed a fry, and I've seen them so many times, and I know people who own them. I've never had the guts to ask somebody if I could surf it. So yeah, it'd be kind of cool to be able to order a board from him. Yeah.
I know I'm super curious as well. And I too know people that own them and I've never ridden one and I'm just very curious about them.
Mm, yeah.
Um, you talked earlier about the kind of the local board building community not fully embracing your entry onto the scene. I'm curious if you've been embraced or accepted at this point, and are there peers that you're able to kind of bounce ideas off of and learn from?
You know, David, I'm a pretty introverted guy, so I really like to keep to myself, and sometimes that's misinterpreted as like thinking that I'm better than other people or that I'm disinterested. It's really not that. I just I'm a bit socially awkward, and I'm like I'm so driven and focused on the thing that I want to do and it isn't just normal board building stuff. So I'm like when I get in the shop, I'm like really full on in that direction. Um, so I don't really, no, I haven't really connected with the local community for better for worse. I don't know. Um, I did try to do. It's funny because I felt like I wanted to do something about that, and I tried to do a party. It was called like the board builders block party. That's what I called it. And I think it was a few years ago, I had reached out to all the local board builders, some of whom I had met and some that I just knew through Instagram. And I invited them all to a party at my shop. And I asked them if they could bring some boards, that they were proud of or whatever they were working on, and that I was going to provide food and beer and live music, and we could all just hang out and like be a community and talk about our work and whatever, and let the local community see the boards. and only one person showed up out of like
Oh no.
15 people that I invited. Uh, anyways, it wound up being like a great party. It was really funny. Like it was just a party, and there was like a guy who brought a couple boards. I was like, dude, that's cool that you brought some boards. Nobody else did, but it's really cool that you
Yeah.
brought some boards. Um, anyways, yeah, that was maybe my last attempt, like, I don't know, more formal attempt to do something about it. But I think also it's just in the Northeast, it's definitely more of a lone wolf enterprise. Like it's a solo endeavor, maybe more than I've experienced in California. Just because, yeah, my buddy owns a glass shop in Oceanside, and when I go to his shop, there are all these other world class board builders in the same industrial park,
Yeah.
and they'll just walk over and be like asking some questions, grab a couple supplies that they need, like, I need eggs and milk. It's like that kind of neighborhood vibe,
Yeah.
and I I find it very appealing, and like, yeah, but that's just not really where at least the community is right now. But I do have to say that there are a couple guys who either started like close to the same time as me, more like garage backyard shaper guys, or and a couple other dudes that are more making a like a proper shop effort to like do board building in the area right now, that I'm in at least small conversation with, and that's pretty cool. Like I had a couple guys come by the shop the other day, and I haven't really had anybody ever do that. Normally people stay away. I don't know why. Like it's kind of an open door thing for me, but yeah, they actually like came into the shop, and I got to tell them sort of how I do things, and they asked me some questions. One of them shapes, one of them glasses, and we just got to throw around some ideas. And I told them if they ever have any questions about things that they could ask me, because normally it's a closed door kind of thing. It's like your secret recipe, and you don't share your tricks. But uh, yeah, I don't know. I would really like to be somebody who hopefully facilitates that kind of community thing.
Yeah.
I just haven't, yeah, really found myself a part of it as of yet. Yeah.
I'm curious, like speaking of locality, are most of your clients New Yorkers?
Yeah. Yeah, for
Okay.
sure. I'd say probably 80%.
Okay.
The rest are California or elsewhere. A lot of
Uh,
California. If it's not New York, it's California.
do you spend time building boards anywhere else?
I built some boards out there in California,
Okay.
um but yeah, mainly my own shop. I have like such a idiosyncratic setup,
Yeah.
and also, yeah. Dude, I just like I have such a way of doing it like my own way. I tried glassing in my friend's glass shop, and it was like brushing your teeth with your left hand. It was so unnatural feeling, like just not knowing where the things were. And yeah, so I was like, man, I should just stick to my own shop.
Do you ever envision living and working anywhere else elsewhere other than New York, or do you think you'll be there for the indefinite future?
Yeah, probably indefinite future. I mean, I fantasize about living other places a lot. I used to dream of living in Puerto Rico and trying to build boards down there, um but there's a really interesting thing about being this close to the city, and just that the perspective that it gives you on, like a more like culture, and just the closeness to the art world, and to, yeah, even things like fashion, design, architecture, all that stuff. I feel like that is somehow infused in my vision of my work. And yeah, I don't know, it's just
Yeah, I could see that.
healthy to me,
I could
exciting.
see that. Um, Unrelated to any of that, but I'm just curious, do you still have time to write poetry?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's normally like end of the night kind of thing. um I just jot down a few thoughts, but that's sort of always how my poetry has been, is just a few lines here and there, and then I compile it into a work, because it's normally me working through some things that I'm uh contemplating, right, about existence, life, whatever. And so then it later becomes a piece, but it's normally just a few lines. So not like, oh, okay, it's time to write a poem. Um, it's just a few thoughts here and there, and then I come back to it later. So yeah, I feel like I'm always kind of writing, but I'm definitely not like sitting down at the typewriter, kind of not that kind of writer.
Does that final work ever see the light of day, or does it ever get shared publicly?
I'm gonna share it. I'm gonna share it. I have a small book of poetry that was published, but self-published, but I'm gonna republish it, and I'm gonna make that public. It's really odd to most people, the work. So but that's cool to me. I'm excited to fuck with people's heads a little bit. So yeah, I'm gonna uh post about it at some point next year probably. Um yeah, that'd be cool.
For anybody who wants to get in on edition 4 of Paul Surf, do they have to be a pre-existing customer, or what's the right way to do that?
Nope. No, yeah, they can just shoot us an email at info@paulsurf.com, and I normally have a phone call with everybody and just chat about what they're looking for. Um, and then we can let them know when it'll be coming out. We actually, in the past, we would take deposits, but then that creates a little bit of pressure on me to get it done. And I don't like that. So now it's no deposit. It's just gonna make the board, and when it's done, it's done. So people can still sign up. We're not gonna take their money. I'll build you a board, and then you can pay for it when it's done. So
Cool.
I think try to keep it
Good.
as easy as possible, low stress.
Yeah, good for you. And then final question is, what was the last surfboard that you rode?
That was the Hobie. Yeah, 67 Hobie. That weighs 40 pounds. It's a tank, but yeah, it slides. It's so fast down the line. It's really, really fun, and like unlike any other board I've ridden.
And 50 years old,
Yeah, 50 something.
which is a testament. That's amazing.
Yeah, cool board, man.
Where'd you get it?
I got it out here in Long Island, actually. I bought it for $1,000 on Craigslist, like right when I moved to Rockaway. And I just wanted a proper old log, and I happened to find this. It was nearly mint condition. This beautiful, it looks like it could have been shaped by Phil Edwards or something. I mean, it's just like perfect outline, really nice rail. It's heavy, like glass, super heavy. You can't ding the thing. And yeah, it has this like massive plastic deef and it still rides great. So pretty cool experience. I love letting other people try it. It always blows their mind. They're like, how the hell do you even turn this thing? It's just so heavy.
Yeah,
Yeah, nothing like that kind of speed and glide. And when you ride a board like that, and then you look at the way that dudes were surfing back then, the old footage of guys in Malibu, it makes sense. It's like, oh, well, that was the way that you could ride these boards. Now you see people trying to ride, like a modern shape, like a hot dogger, like that kind of style. And it's like affecting that style, but when you ride the board that was made during that era, it's like really connects. Like, whoa, okay, makes sense. Like the slipping and the
Yeah.
stall and all that. It's like it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Super cool. Right on. Well, I'm glad that this conversation came together, finally worked
Too,
out. We were
man.
able to take so much time to fully unpack it.
Me too. We covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
I hope people find it interesting. And yeah, I'd like to reiterate, if anybody like board builders out there have any questions, I love sharing this stuff. And I'm actually like, yeah, trying to do these courses at my shop. I'm gonna do one in the spring, that are more like all like intensive. So not just shaping, but also the glassing and the sanding. I want to show people how to do it, the whole process, because that doesn't really exist as far as I know out there. And yeah, just to have like a little group of people that can learn together. I've been doing one-on-one shaping courses in the past, but I like the idea of having between 4 and 6 people in the shop asking questions together and sort of having that kind of learning environment for building boards. So anyways, yeah, if anyone's interested out there, I'll be posting about it next year, and it'd be cool to share that with people.
Yeah. That was what didn't exist when you were getting into it.
Exactly. That's right.
Right on, Paul. Well, I'll direct everybody to your website and social media and all that in post production.
Thank you so much, David. It was really nice speaking with you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.